Welcome to Bme Entrepreneurs session. For this session, we will be talking about and discuss about the translation path, how to take an idea from concept to commercial product. We will also hear about the resources which are available to students interested in translating their technology, their ideas, both within and outside the university, and the licensing as well as startup options. I'm Hua Pan, assistant professor at Washington University in St. Louis. I will introduce our panelists. We have Nat Duong, a vice president, research and development at Bmes Biosciences, and Jonathan Gang, Chief CEO of Braid Seed LLC, and also Paul Torres, President and Chief Strategy Officer at HHS. And then each of them will introduce themselves with their own slides. So, without overdue, I will turn it over to Nat.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Nathan Dormer, VP of R&D at a small pharmaceutical startup in Kansas City. We have about 5 people in our company, so when I'm talking from a perspective of a very, very small team. These guys I know have bigger teams, so they'll be able to provide you the opposite end of that as well. So a little bit about me on paper. I began at Orbis as a senior scientist straight out of grad school. I have an undergraduate in chemical engineering from KU. I loved Lawrence, Kansas so much. I stuck around to be part of their inaugural PhD bioengineering program. So I was part of the first, actually I think I was the second PhD in BioE coming out of KU in 2011. I did a biomaterials and tissue engineering track, so my thesis research centered around differentiating stem cells from the umbilical cord of babies into cartilage and bone. And we did that essentially by seeding these stem cells onto microparticle scaffolds that would elute growth factors of TGF-beta and BMP2. So it's really sci-fi type stuff in graduate school. I also did an internship at Kinetic Concepts down in San Antonio, which I really enjoyed. It's something that got me interested in going into industry. And during that time, during graduate school and my time at Orbis, I've been fortunate enough to be on a lot of publications, magazine articles, book chapters, giving podium presentations and whatnot about the fields that I've practiced in. At Orbis, I've had the chance to author and co-author many SBIRs. I think in total we've submitted 13 or 14 over the past 5 years. Half of those have been funded by the NIH or DoD, and that's primarily the funding mechanism that's relevant to my entrepreneur track. And in addition to that, I'm skilled in drug formulation and delivery mechanisms for oral, injectable, otic, and dermal type products. So a little bit about my entrepreneurial experience. So when I was in graduate school, I essentially worked on this microparticle technology. You can see up at the top, on the left, you have microspheres that are polydispersed, they say. They're a bunch of different sizes. The technology that I worked on to make those tissue engineering scaffolds actually made microspheres with a very narrow size distribution. You can see those on the top right. Each particle is the exact same size, smooth surface morphology. And what basically that allowed for, since drug release rate is a function of diameter, it allows you to predict and fine-tune that drug release rate to a very high degree. So this technology was actually invented by somebody on my thesis committee when he was in graduate school at University of Illinois. And sometime during the course of my graduate career, he decided he wanted to make a company based on that. So basically, he got all the rights from University of Illinois to take this technology and form a company which is now known as Orbis Biosciences, an orb being a sphere type shape. So on the left, you can see a picture of one of our first lab setups at Orbis. You can see the very fancy wooden box that we use to hold up a TV. We have a camera rigged with a stroboscope, essentially, so we can visualize the particles coming out of the nozzle. That nozzle of which was handmade from HPLC parts. Parts of the nozzle were also made out of glass by the scientists themselves by hand. So we would use a blowtorch to essentially close the end of this glass, and then we'd very slowly sand open the hole on the end of the nozzle. And then if you went too fast, your hole would be too big and you'd essentially have to start over. So over the course of the 5 years with SBIR funding and some strategic partnerships with larger pharma companies that saw essentially value in this technology, we were able to build what you see on the right, which is a fully automated version of our microparticle technology that's CGMP compliant. So essentially, this piece of machinery has a touchscreen user interface, and you basically put in your batch, and you dump all the ingredients in and hit start, and it goes ahead and makes a 30-kilogram batch of your microsphere product for you, and you essentially just have to stand there and wait. So I really like to emphasize the power of SBIRs with that. Can really take you from rudimentary type setups to something that's very elegant and applicable. It can really help you see your visions and your dreams within your own entrepreneurial efforts. And what's especially exciting about being an entrepreneur, I think that making an impact on people's lives by putting ideas into practice is something that's really resonated with me. Working with talented people who'd rather get a lot of empirical data rather than sit around and talk about it. I like to be around people that say, hey, let's just go do it. Let's try it. Let's race to the end and see what happens. Setting your own schedule is a big one. People bring that up a lot, and it is true. Working in a startup, I got to set my own hours and lifestyle a little bit. I had a CEO. I was fortunate enough, as long as I was getting my work done, I was welcome to stay at the company. And then also having the opportunity to learn about everything. When I was in graduate school, I always had my nose in other people's experiments, asking them if they needed help, just trying to find out different ways to learn a little bit about everything, because you never know what you're going to run into, once you get out in the field. So some of the lesser known things, this is my last slide, I promise. Lesser known things that I personally would recommend to somebody to prepare as a job for an entrepreneur. You really want to finely hone your time management skills, have your computer skills, your soft skills done, your communication skills with people. You can't be troubled you can't afford to be troubled with simple things like learning how to use Microsoft Office or EndNote. You're really going to have to be able to work fast and on your feet if you're in a small startup type environment. You also want to embrace stressful situations. It sounds silly, but if you stand there and just panic, nothing's going to get fixed. So you just have to use the skills you've acquired in your school to basically strategize and figure out how you're going to solve the problems as you approach them. You also want to focus on where information can be found. I can tell you when I started in this startup company, I had zero pharmaceutical experience except from what I'd learned in graduate school. But what I always told my boss is, I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out. Give me 2 weeks. And that's worked out pretty well. You'd be surprised what you're able to do if you're just willing to go look for answers. Learn a little bit about everything. I mentioned that earlier. And do an internship if you have the chance, so you can feel out what industry's like and maybe what are some of the bigger unmet needs in industry that maybe you can address as an entrepreneur. Own the problems that arise on your watch. If something happens in the lab or with an experiment, you want to make sure you investigate, delegate if you have an associate that can help you, document everything, network, solve, and make sure you communicate the solution that you've come to your colleagues so something like that doesn't happen again. You also don't want to shy away from stepping outside your comfort zone. Be scrappy. I was once told that The moment you feel that you're about to go too far or that you've gone too far in something is the moment that you're about to grow. Of course, there are some exceptions to that professionally. You don't want to go crazy, but you don't want to be scared of essentially stepping outside your comfort zone, because that will really limit the impact you have as an entrepreneur. Do communicate directly with the people that it can institute change. If you have a problem with somebody, or if there's something that needs to be changed, go directly to that person and say, hey, I think we need to work through this, or I think that the experiment would be better set up like XYZ instead of the way you have it here. What do you think? And then something my design professor in chemical engineering always told me is that you want to race to the end first. Get the big picture to the problem. What do you want to do? And then go back and fill in the details. How exactly you're going to get there? And once you go fill in the details, the parties that you'll need to help you get there will become more pertinent, and it'll be a clearer path when you go back the second time. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat. So Jonathan will be our next panelist to introduce himself.
Great, thanks, and thanks to Nate for giving us the overview on how to become an entrepreneur and do it successfully. I'm going to give you, I guess, just a higher level intro into myself and my company, and sort of how I came to accidentally become an entrepreneur. I'm the son of 2 lawyers, which means I had to go and become a bioengineer. I got as far away from the law as I could, and was a bioengineer out of UC San Diego, and then got my doctorate from the University of Washington, where I studied biomaterials. But because I'm the son of 2 lawyers, I decided to go get a law degree. And I thought that working at the intersection between a couple of different disciplines was a really cool idea, and the opportunity to sort of wear that science and engineering hat and also a legal hat would be a lot of fun, and it was. So I was actually trained to become a patent litigator, and I had the full intention of going off and working in that world when. During my 2L year, my second year in law school, I participated in a program that brought folks from the legal world together with engineers from the other side of Northwestern, with medical students, and with business students, and we were challenged to identify a clinical problem to solve. And then to create sort of the technological underpinnings to solve that problem, and then create the business plan to engage it and commercialize it. And we were successful not only in class, but in actually building that foundation for a young company. And so that's exactly what I did during my time at Northwestern. And that is what Brightseed is now grown into today, a company that I co-founded, and raised a seed round of $1.5 million my 3L year of law school, and successfully funded. So what is Brightseed? Well, we were asked to step into the operating room and watch some surgeries and see if there wasn't some sort of a clinical problem that we might find. And so we were actually in a minimally invasive surgery just like this one when, oops, there was an inadvertent cut to a blood vessel that led to a lot of panic within the operating room. And we sat back and said, how is it that the smartest folks in surgery at this great institution could have problems like this? And what we realized was that surgeons that are performing laparoscopic or robotic surgery don't have that fine tactile sense to be able to palpate and feel for hidden blood vessels. They can't see as well either. And so we thought, well, why don't we make the tools that surgeons are using smarter so that they can actually identify those hidden vessels before an accident gets made. So minimally invasive surgery, this is a type of surgery where you just poke a couple holes in the abdomen instead of filleting a patient wide open, and then the entire surgery is conducted on screen. So there are a lot of advantages to this, and there's a lot of reasons that surgery has shifted in this direction. but there are a lot of problems associated with reoperations, inflammation, and so on. And so that's where Brightseed comes in. We're actually putting optical systems directly into the jaws of the tools that the surgeon is already using, and then using the biological markers of blood vessels, ureters, and bile ducts to be able to show that information on screen in real time so that the surgeon is able to strategically ligate or avoid those vessels. And so they get information on the same screen that they're already looking at. So we build a tool that isn't something you have to retract your normal dissectors for and drop in some other imaging system. We actually integrate the technology directly into the tools that they already use, so we don't disrupt surgeon workflow. So it's been 3 years now since we started the company. I'm excited to say that we've got a functioning 8mm diameter tool that we've taken into a whole range of animal studies showing that it's working. We've filed a lot of applications. We've got 5 full-time folks working at the company and about as many part-timers. And to Nate's point, it's really important to think about non-dilutive financing along with equity financing. And so to that end, we've been successful getting grants from both the NSF and the NIH. And we've had some accolades along the way. So it's an exciting journey, and I'm happy to talk more about my experiences here shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. So our next panelist, Paul, will introduce himself, please.
So first of all, each of you deserve a little bit of congratulations, because I understand this session was only listed on the schedule and didn't even have a summary in the book. So congratulations to all of you for being the smartest ones in the building, for finding this one here. So the point of us introducing ourselves up here is so you get a little glimpse about where you are and where we are, so you can formulate questions. All we have prepared today are these slides. The rest of the time is for you to be formulating, how can I make a connection with the panel to forward my goals? I'll tell you a little bit about me as we get into here. I only have about 5 slides, but I don't deserve to be here. I'm one of these people that just, and if you were in my presentation earlier at Texas A&M for the luncheon, there were about 400 people there. I mentioned some of these same things. Pretty much my entire life, I have felt that I can be comfortable in these situations, but something has always felt a little off, a little broken, a little just not quite there. And I wanted to make sure that if that is a feeling that is in this room today among some of the best and brightest, that this is where you're supposed to feel, that this is a jumping point for you in your career, with your vision, with your innovation, to know that things change after college. When you jump into this realm where innovation is just done every single day. I was asked why I enjoy serving on the BMES Industry Advisory Board. And my response has always been the same. It's you. The reason why this serving on the board is so wonderful is because I know that sitting in front of me right now are people that when they try to go to sleep at night, that they're formulating these ideas, that they just want a shot at it, that they have trouble sleeping because their circulation is just pumping and they can't wait for the next day just to start it and see if they can prove it. That's very exciting. And I know that's what's going on. That's what's going on here. Okay, so what do I do? One of the things that I do right now is I serve as the Chief Strategy Officer and President of a firm called HHS. I have 14,000 employees. One of those service lines is biomedical and clinical engineering, where we do the preventive and corrective maintenance on medical devices, all medical devices that support healthcare. So just think about what it takes to support every operation, every patient, and every condition on every floor. And this is the knowledge that I've been able to acquire through an entrepreneurial and intrapreneurial spirit. We talked about this earlier as well, that the difference between an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur is, if you're an intrapreneur, you can get fired because you're essentially an entrepreneur in an organization. If you're an entrepreneur, you get canceled, right? That's pretty much how that works. But I want to tell you about my experiences as an intrapreneur and an entrepreneur. First, I've been married for 20 years with 5 children. I met my wife at Texas A&M University. The day that I met my wife, I am fairly certain that my sweaters were tucked into my pants. I have married up, and she'll be the first to tell you that. But 5 children later, we're there living in the shadows of Texas A&M, serving on the board. We love the university. We love what we do and where we live. I'm 22 years old, many years ago, right after college. And the CEO of the very first healthcare company that I worked for came into my office. My office was probably the size of a bathroom stall, right? A cubicle. That was my office. I did have my best friend there with me in the office at the time, and we were working, but the CEO came in and he said, "Paul, we need to increase sales." And what we were doing at the time was provisioning medical equipment for acute care across the United States. And that was his question. We need to increase sales. How can we do that? So we had a brainstorming session. No risk, right? No idea is a bad idea. But all 3 of us had an immense desire to increase sales because we knew what we were doing was a good thing in catering to what was then a rural healthcare market. And so I said, it sure would be nice if we didn't have to chase requests for proposals. We had 6 salesmen across the country, each of them probably making about $120,000, looking for onesie-twosie opportunities to provide medical equipment in the acute care market. That's a lot of money with not very much result. So instead of chasing, I just thought, it sure would be nice if everybody who needed anything could just come to us and ask for it. So the CEO says, great idea. If you build it, you can run it. You can own it. So that started my first foray into being an entrepreneur, being provided an organization that because of one question, 2 people, my friend and I, Reed, and a 333 megahertz computer and a website, that over 5 years and thousands of hospitals received more than 6,300 RFPs and ended up 2 people being 50% of the company's revenue, equaling $25 million a year. So let's think about that as a 22-year-old, right? My office is the size of a bathroom. My next office, although your career shouldn't be measured on the size of your office, it was better. It was next to the CEO's office, right? And clearly he wanted to come in and have more brainstorming sessions. But over 5 years, we did really well, and it was fun, and it was exciting, and the communication was incredible, and I would go to sleep at night thinking, how can I make this better? And it was fun. Now you may be thinking, and I heard a whistle, thank you very much, I appreciate that, well done. You may be thinking, that's a good job, that's a lot of money, and it was a lot of money, it was more money than we had ever seen at the time. The real benefit was the trust that CEOs and the C-suite at thousands of hospitals across the country then placed in me. Yes, there's a monetary benefit, but then there was also a trust benefit that has truly launched and sustained my career are the networks and relationships that have been built. All right, who's this gentleman to the left? 10 points if you remember his name. I think it's Watto. Oh, I'm sorry. So I can make a lot of money, but left and right I have a little bit of trouble with. Star Wars figure. Yeah. So this is Bezos, right? CEO of Amazon. Sells everything, right? anything and everything to anyone. The Star Wars character has anything and everything for every spaceship in Star Wars, and it's all used medical equipment. My career is somewhere in between there, of having all of this old used medical equipment and brand new stuff that's being sold to the world, right? My place is a very unique place. At the end of the day, though, what I want to leave with you is you guys have gut feelings. You want to go with it, right? Let's figure out how to translate it. That's why we're here. So this phrase I always like to bank on is, in God we trust, but all others must bring data. Last year, I ended with this in my presentation, and I think it summarizes pretty well that we've got tigers by the tail in this room. But until you can formalize it, put some numbers behind it, get some venture backing, remove the barriers, whether it be reduced or shrinking market size or reimbursements, or then you've got the flip side of all of this of once you've got this tiger by the tail and everything, then you have to compete with group purchasing organizations, which you don't know anything about. And I don't want to scare you, but I want to support you. So as you've heard and listened to me get through this portion, I hope that you've been able to formulate questions for the three of us about where you need to go with the companies that you've started, with the ideas that you want to start, and close my portion now, and I guess we'll open it up for questions for the panel.
Thank you, Paul. So we would like all of you to own this session. So what we prepared are looks like it's not this one. So we prepared a set of topics for you to communicate with our panelists, so they could discuss about their experience, and then we would like you to come with your questions and interact with our panelists.
Yeah, I think there's microphones on each side as well. Yeah. I think they're actually recording some of the questions as well. Is that correct? So I think they'll want you to speak into the microphone. So name, where you're from, and then a question for the panel or for an individual on the panel.
Ryan Bridges from Arizona State University. So when you guys were forming your companies, when dealing with venture capitalists, what was the biggest hurdle for selling your product?
Yeah, fundraising is obviously critical for any commercial activity, and so you really have to understand sort of who it is that actually invests in early stage companies, followed by middle stage companies versus later stage companies. And so, you know, when I was really starting with the Brightseed team, we really just had a good idea, right, and a hunch. So there's a lot of risk there, a lot of assumptions that we have to test. And that means there's a lot of work that has to get done with money that comes out of the co-founders' pockets. And then you have to bring in some early investment, typically that comes from your friends and family, people that know you and want to bet on you. And so that's sort of who you solicit first. And what's important is that the governments recognize that before you get to some of these institutional investors, like angels, angel networks, and venture capitalists, there's a gap there that needs to get filled, and someone needs to take bets on new companies and new teams early on. And that's what the SBIR, the Small Business Innovation Research Grants, are built for, and STTRs, is to really fund high-risk, high-reward companies And so that's an important path for any young company to take on. And then once you have a prototype, or you've assessed the need and you've evaluated a lot of the different business elements like intellectual property and regulatory risk, then you can start going after pitching your business towards angels. These are typically maybe high net worth individuals that have expertise in the area in which you're practicing, that will help finance earlier stage companies. And then you get to the point where you're looking towards pulling in money from venture capitalists and those other types. And so in Brightseed's case, we raised money out of our own pockets. We got friends and family early on, and we did business plan competitions in order to bring money in to really kick us off. And so that we raised over $1 million then through doing that and with angel networks. And just now have we got something that has, at the fidelity level, that we're really looking towards going after venture capital money. So you really have to understand sort of the stage of your company and who the likely investors are in an entity like that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to do a little follow-up on this, on the VC, because most likely any ideas that you have now, let's just pretend that it's going to be incubated in a small company, less than 5 people, less than 10 people. And what I have seen is that the better the financial condition of the principal, the better they end up negotiating on the better they end up not having to negotiate terms for their intellectual property under duress. Does that make sense? In other words, keep your own house in order, your personal life, and then you won't have to give up the farm when the money's staring you straight in your face, okay? So at a small company, your personal life is inextricably connected with your business life. And so in order to maximize your intellectual property, your innovation, you guys have been living on, dollars, right, in college. Keep on. There's no reason to stop living on dollars in order to protect the non-dilution that you want kind of down the road.
Yeah, I think our funding story is a little bit different. We had a small investment, I think it was $500,000, from essentially friends of the family, of the people that knew the business, and over the last 5 years, we've actually, our revenue stream is maintained by SBIRs and then proof of concept projects with larger pharma companies. So our business is mostly employee owned, so everybody that works at the company has equity. Of course, the founders have most of it. But that's one way you can go. But to speak to Paul's point, there does come a time in every company when you're trying to make the push to get your product out in the market. And I can tell you, if it's a drug product that costs millions and millions of dollars, so you're either going to have a larger company there to help you along the way that has an interest in licensing your technology, and you'll give up a little bit of your company to get that license, or you're going to have to seek funding from VC sources and other places like that too. So the SBIR is a great mechanism, but it can only go so far.
One more follow-up comment that I just have to throw out. Money buys you time. And so the more you get pressed up against not having time, the more someone who has money is going to take advantage of your equity, because you are forced to make a decision, right? You want time, and you want your money to buy you time so that you can make the best decisions.
Benjamin Wallace, recent graduate from University of Pittsburgh, undergrad. I've already come up with half a dozen questions. I'm going to try to limit it to 2 at the moment because one of them is very small. This one is the small one, directed more at Paul. How do I get in contact with the BMES branch that you were talking about. I wrote down its name.
So the BMES Industry Advisory Board is a relatively new board. The BMES has been largely academic for many, many years. And so they have been wanting to increase the industry presence. And as chair of that committee, I work with Ben No. And if you look up Ben No in the dictionary, it will also say rock star. Okay? We have this committee, and the vision is to increase the industry exposure just so that we can have more things like this, translational sessions like this, and get some more street cred.
All right. The other question. That's a nice list. It's not on that list. One of the main reasons I am looking at entrepreneurship as an option is A, I want a job, gosh darn it, and B, I have lots of ideas. So my question is, what is one of the more reliable ways of getting into that sort of field? Because recent grad, I know I need some experience first. Is it better to start with intrapreneurship or trying to find one of these entrepreneurs who's now in a growth stage company? I don't even know how to do that, but I'm pretty sure they're hiring. They're not posting. Thoughts?
Can I feel that? So my recommendation off of his question, right out of college, looking for a job, looking to get some experience, intrapreneurship, especially if your bank account is low. Let's have somebody fund your cubicle, your computer, your life, your food, and then your innovation goes on your own time. Look and see what these large organizations do, what it takes, their risk, their tolerance. But intrapreneurship, working for any organization, is my recommendation coming out, unless you have other indicators that let you know statistically that whatever you've got, what tiger by the tail you have, is about to become fruit. But intrapreneur, for sure.
Thank you.
And I'll just piggyback on that. I think that being an entrepreneur is exciting. You get to wear a lot of different hats. You get exposure to some really great experiences. But if you do that without any other sort of life experiences or mentorship that primes you for taking full advantage of it, I think that it can be a loss. And so I think that I became an entrepreneur when I was in my early 30s, so it was not just out of college. I had some great experiences learning about how to build medical technologies like what we're doing at Brightseed before that, and then was able to apply that there. So to Paul's point, if you can gain that knowledge on someone else's dime or get those experiences first, then I would take advantage of that. And then when you're ready, go back to the idea of working for a small company, and try not to put on the golden handcuffs too early. You want to remember that to stay frugal, so that you're not used to a big paycheck and then have to go backwards in lifestyle when you want to become an entrepreneur and stay lean to build out that
handcuffs.
Company. Yeah, the idea that you have a good paying job or a very good paying job, and you're not willing to go backwards in pay to take the risk to become an entrepreneur or part of a startup where you wouldn't have those resources to pay yourself that salary.
Hi, I'm Kayla Wilson from Clemson University. I actually do have a small startup, and I was just wondering if you could talk about practical steps when you're building your team, because you can't do it all by yourself. And personally, I face some challenges trying to bring in business people to help with that side of things. So can you maybe give some tips on how to make sure you get the right people on your team?
Tell me a little bit about your company.
It's a low-cost glucose monitoring system developed for low-resource settings where monitoring doesn't happen today. And the goal originally was to have it simple enough that we could do decentralized manufacturing, because a huge hurdle is actually getting the devices into the country. So if you can set up a small manufacturing process there, then you kind of can help with some of those distribution hurdles, and it also is a much lower cost.
My very first suggestion is a no-cost suggestion, and it's build a board, an advisory board. A board is one of the greatest ways to network at no cost. You could give them shares if you wanted to, but it's a non-remunerated position. Many people will do it out of the kindness of their hearts because they believe in what you believe in as well. They'll make the connections for you. They'll do what they can on their own time. But having a large and diverse board is one, a way to show your appreciation for people who have helped you along the way, as well as show strategic thought on where you're headed by saying, this person, Nate, is going to be on my board. I know he has connections. I want him on my board. I want his thought. I want his diversity, and a good range of diversity on the board. That's my first suggestion. No money at all, but a clear vision so that they can believe in it as much as you.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that finding folks that have taken a technology that comes from the same area through to at least a later stage of development is important. Networking into those relationships is critical, and then they can help to provide guidance on, who do you need full-time employees that serve particular roles? Can you get by with just having consultants help you out to a certain extent, and work with you to sort of take a critical eye to the team that you have, the milestones you have to reach, and what type of assistance you're going to need to get there. And then you can begin to think about, who are those folks that I'm going to work side by side with, and how do I need to vet them? How do I need to look at the skill sets that I'm going to need going forward? So I think that's important. And it all comes down to the stage of the company you're at and the milestones you're trying to reach.
Thank you.
Hey, so I'm Andrew. I'm a senior at Clemson University, and I'm kind of in the middle of our senior design project type thing. So my question was, do you recommend taking advantage of that kind of institutional support, or not? And if not, then how do I go about finding needs and evaluating them without it?
Yeah, so first off, I'd say you're in an awesome position because you get to be a student and tell people you're a student and ask for advice and help as a student. And that opens a lot of doors and gets you a lot of access that other folks may not. And so taking advantage of, if you're a bioengineer, thinking about talking to doctors in specialties that are of interest to you, or other folks that are part of the hospital, and talking to them about identifying potential problems that are out there or following trends. Going to them and trying to get advice simply as a student is, I think, the first step, and you can network into that. Should be very, very easy. And then obviously, if there are classes available to you, or capstones that you can get more structured help doing assessments of clinical problems, then that's a great starting point.
At Texas A&M University, I'm going to answer this maybe from a slightly different angle. They have gone through great lengths to make sure that if any of you, let's say you are inventors, you're no longer in college, you're innovators, and you have an idea, that if you choose to do a senior project at Texas A&M, that your IP stays with you, right? We are free labor at the university, right? It's for experience. And so some of your question depends on which university you are doing these senior, if I understand your question, it's where you're doing your senior design. Pardon?
Oh.
So Clemson owns the IP.
Mm-hmm.
if I bring an idea to Clemson, I want you to do it, then Clemson owns the IP. That's my understanding here in this room. So it's different at different universities.
Okay.
And that's a competitive edge, one way or the other. It's the landscape. One of the things that I know Texas A&M is trying to do, and this is no secret, is if you have an idea, they want it to be able to start at the senior design, get some kind of mock-up, and go all the way through to preclinical trials, all in one area. All there on campus, right off campus, with quasi-governmental agencies. I mean, they want to house this all and have this experience and this labor, but the IP is from the inventor.
And I'll just add, in the case of our company, when it was invented at Illinois, we actually still pay the University of Illinois for that invention in 2001. For the manufacturing platform, we pay them every year, and it is not cheap. So it definitely has a lot to do with where your ideas are coming from and what sort of environment you're practicing your entrepreneurship.
Okay. Thank you. That was loud.
Hi there, my name is Mohi Ahmed. I'm from the University of Illinois at Chicago. My question is thinking way down the line. Let's say you start a company and it becomes a threat to a bigger company. How do you play defense and kind of keep these companies at bay? Or do you just have to kind of make that choice of, is it time to be bought out here? Is that the end goal? Or is there some way to play defense and keep the big fish out?
I'm not sure where my counterparts sit here, but I love that question because I love the underdog. I was the underdog, I'm still the underdog, and it's just the fight that I have in me because I can sit where I sit and I see innovation and I see desire. And largely at other organizations that are larger, they tend to lose it for one reason or another, just because of their size and their structure. Your question, though, is as a hypothetical. It could go either way. It depends on what your personal desires are and your drive is. But competition in the marketplace, once you get to be a threat, right, then you will see the wrath of how large a large company actually is. Each of you have heard about a company buying out another one and stifling the innovation just because they don't want it to come to market, because it threatens revenue, it threatens margins, it threatens stock, it threatens job, threatens livelihood. So those are some big forces to reckon with, and they are at play, and I see them every day in particular, and some of you who know me know my thoughts on group purchasing organizations, which are contracting entities that the healthcare space has, that they will make you choose a single or a dual source provider for a medical device. And so the innovator, the little guy, has to come in and has to do loaners at hospitals to get a physician to say, hey, I like this, to be able to funnel it up the chain through the group purchasing organization to say, I understand this is what I need to buy to be compliant, but you got to take a look at this, right? So there's innovative ways to do it in niches, but I'm all about the fight. So that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, so this is where the patent litigator side of me jumps out. You know, we're in a lucky place here in the U.S. because we've got a great system for protecting our innovations, and it really is the foundation for any sort of medical device that's getting made. It's how we document and protect that innovation. Now, that isn't to say that you don't have to be strategic. You just have to file it and you're safe. That's not necessarily true. You have to be very mindful about how you build a strong patent portfolio and you prevent others from coming into the space and practicing that innovation. And so it's something that we've institutionalized at Brightseed. Every 2 weeks we do a hard assessment of what innovations we brought forward over that short time period, and we interact with our patent lawyer to make sure that we're covering those innovations. What is interesting, though, is that interacting with strategics, companies that could be competitors or potential purchasers of your technology or licensors of your technology, that it's a common practice because in many ways you and these guys are really the engines of innovation in the United States. We're the ones that are identifying the problems in the hospitals, and then we're the ones creating the solutions. And so in many ways, a lot of these companies want to spur that type of innovation, see which ones rise to the top, and then scoop them up from there. And so in many cases, if you're strategic, then you can actually create synergies between the companies, and you'll see warmer relationships there. That isn't to say that you just sort of roll over when a big company comes calling. You have to be defensive at all times because these are business decisions that are getting made. But there is, we're all part of the same ecosystem.
I'd agree wholeheartedly with Jonathan. Well, when it comes to larger companies approaching you, one, make sure your IP's in place. If you think you have something special, get that written down in a legal matter. And two, when you're dealing with larger companies, that's your opportunity to flex your muscle. If they're approaching you, you have something that's either threatening to them or they find really, really intriguing. And it's not uncommon that a lot of very large companies will look at a dozen or so small companies with similar technologies and vet them all out. And they give each one of those companies a small sum of money in 6 months to essentially demonstrate what they can do with maybe the same drug or the same application. And in the end, one of them could lead to a license agreement. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely a chance for you to show what you're made of.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys being here.
Hey guys. So first, thanks for coming out. My name's Luke. I'm a sophomore at Texas A&M. And I kind of wanted to build on Andrew's last question about institutional support. Could you share your perspective on how the entrepreneurial process relates to pursuing graduate school? I know especially for Jonathan and Nate, you guys obviously went through a PhD program. And then Paul, maybe you could speak to Texas A&M's Master's in Engineering program and how they're looking at going through a different realm of graduate school as it relates to entrepreneurship.
So in the interest of time, because I think we only have 3 minutes left, is that correct? Oh, 18 minutes, okay, good. Well then, never mind.
As far as KU goes, they're really supportive of the entrepreneurial path, and I think that with my particular situation, I wasn't even necessarily looking to join a startup. It was all about who I knew. So like I said, the guy that started our company was on my thesis committee, and I was just in his office one day talking about some results of one of my last papers, and I was like, hey, you guys need any help over at Orbis? And he was like, you want to work for us? I was like, yeah, I'd consider it. And so it was something I just walked into, and I think that I got lucky in the fact that I really ended up enjoying what I did. But I did have colleagues that actually sought out starting their own businesses from day one as graduate students, and some of them have done very, very well, and some of them didn't actually. When they got out there, they found out they didn't have the type of product that they thought they did. So it can go either way, but definitely, like Jonathan was talking about earlier, you want to utilize your professors and the resources you have available to make the best educated decision about what path you take.
Yeah, and I would say that I had sort of a unique experience because I started my company in law school of all places, and it's surprisingly a good education to have when you're starting a new company, because it's all about issue spotting and being able to communicate messaging, and that's exactly what you do in a startup company, and so it was a tremendous experience to have under my belt. But importantly, graduate school and an engineering background was very important when it came to raising money, being able to show that you had brought technologies forward before, over the course of a number of years was important, and the degree certainly helped us sort of round out our engineering team. And so education was certainly a critical component to our early success. And then it just comes down to sort of how scrappy you are and how much you want it when you're actually building out a young company, because you have to be nimble and you have to take on a lot of responsibility and you have to work a lot of hours. But that was sort of my experience, and it helped us raise the money we needed to really turn into a viable company with a full team.
And then I think I'll probably reserve a little bit of this instead of talking about the Texas A&M Master's Program necessarily, although I would love to. If any of you would like to talk about the Texas A&M Master's Program that was alluded to in the question, have plenty of time afterwards, but I see that we have a couple more questions, and so we'll get to those. But if that has piqued your interest, definitely, let's discuss. Next question.
So my question is about team management. So I'm Josh. I'm a student at Johns Hopkins University, and so we're doing our senior design project, and we have groups of 5 people on the team. So I was just wondering on what your thoughts on strategies to use to share your vision for the project with the rest of the team as team leaders yourselves.
What's the phrase, where there is no vision, the people perish? If you can get your team to all come together on that vision and you're humming, which I understand is the question, how do you do that?
Yeah.
I guess I'm just kind of reiterating that how important it is to have them all see your vision, or at least be on the same bus, right? But I'd probably like to hear from Jonathan or Nate on how they've done it.
I think if you guys aren't familiar with the biodesign program and the textbook that came out of Stanford, it's an important read. And I think one of the teachings in there is to assemble early on, if you're coming together as a team, something called an acceptance criteria. And this is basically spelling out sort of what your team is looking for and what you would call a success. And so understanding whether you guys share a vision for the type of company you want to build, the area in which you want to build it. Do you want to create a company that's going to stand on its own for 20 years? Or are you looking to build a technology and then sell it within a short amount of time? Do you want to help an impoverished population, or do you want to go after a larger target market? All of these are questions that you as a team need to grapple with, so that when it comes down to identifying what that clinical problem is that you want to solve, you're all on the same page, and you can define success in unison, so that you don't come across those problems later on after you've spent a lot of hours taking on a problem. And so I think it's important to be strategic in your thinking about what is going to be, what you're going to define as success early on with the rest of your teammates.
And that definition of success can be even on an individual level among the teammates. So you want to make sure you recruit and retain personalities and people that have the same vision as you do, in the lab from day-to-day detail. Do you have people that have the same idea of what a win in the lab is versus what a failure is? You definitely want to make sure your team members are all marching towards the same goal, and that you don't have one team member out of your group that spends an inordinate amount of time off in the woods in the details when the rest of the team is trying to strategize to think of what to do next. So you want to make sure you evaluate your team members up front on an individual level too when you put together that team.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Zach Gervin, Trump University. And I was wondering when you're looking to get into a market, what market characteristic do you look for to make sure all right, I have this product, is this market worth going after?
No competitors. That's my first one. What niche?
Is that something you can actually find, or market without any competitors?
Sure. Niche markets, right? You can fragment a market and go after a certain portion of it, and then you become the innovator, the leader in the niche, rather than trying to be an end-all, a larger player. Creating your own competitive landscape. I know that sounds like pie in the sky, but it's done, and it's done by some of the greatest innovators on the planet. And then afterwards, you look back and think, how did we not do this before? How did we survive before this? But that's my first one.
Can you give an example of like anything recent in the medical field that's been like that?
So Davinci Robots probably comes to mind, whether you see that as a success or not. I mean, robots operating on your mother, your grandmother, I mean, that takes a lot of gall. They created a $1.2 million medical device that you have to buy another $1 million worth of specialized instruments that affix themselves to the device. So you're paying $2-point-some-odd million for a robot as opposed to hiring 2 or 3, OR surgeons to do the same thing. I mean, right away, who competes with that? Nobody at the beginning did.
Yeah, and I would agree with Paul. I think going after a smaller market segment is important, where you can demonstrate traction. You have the easiest time getting purchasers and customers. And then demonstrating that what you're building is really a platform technology of some kind, that you're going to have a product pipeline that may allow you then to enter into adjacent segments, and just so that your total addressable market is quite large, but you can start by getting traction in some of the smaller markets. And so for Brightseed, we're building a technology that eventually we see going into any laparoscopic dissector or energy tool. But to begin with, we actually brought on a young surgeon to help us with our surgical interviews. And so we then conducted interviews with at least 50 different surgeons of all different stripes and specialties, and then identified that, hey, colorectal and general surgery are really good markets for our tool, our first tool, and that within that, cases of inflammation like diverticulitis are really good places where surgeons have a real problem and need this technology. And so for my company, we're really focused on those specific sets of procedures with specific indications that we can get traction, and then we can grow the pie and take it into additional market segments over time. But getting those first customers is very important, and demonstrating that traction is very important.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. My name is Tram. I'm from the Ohio State University. And my question is, how do you approach the clinicians to understand their unmet needs so that you can improve the value of your products?
Yeah, this really is it's an important question, and it dovetails nicely off that last answer, which is, I went and tried talking to a bunch of surgeons, and they were just like, well, who the heck are you? You don't speak the same language. You don't, you're asking questions that maybe are phrased inappropriately. And so we actually took a long look at how we approach doctors, especially surgeons, and eventually decided that we were going to pull in young surgeons to help us interact with more seasoned doctors, and then get input from them that way. And all different doctors have different sort of personality types, and so you typically want to go in there and not say you're going to do something and you're going to change the way that they're going to interact, you typically want to go in and ask them, show a technology, ask them how it could be beneficial, or instead, better yet, focus on the problems that they may have and have them explain what those issues look like and walk through the workflow. And then you can get further in conversation into what a particular solution could look like and how that would fit into their workflow. So I think you have to be very mindful about the types of doctors that you're talking to and how to best approach them.
Thank you for your time.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Jake. I'm from the University of Florida. And a question I have is, do you have any good books you recommend for productivity, motivation, and entrepreneurship?
I'm going to throw some out there while you two think about probably more applicable books. But, and maybe some books and even some suggestions, since these are kind of parting thoughts. But I was always impressed by, I would call them self-help books. But I wanted to know how people who knew how to manage money, how did they know how to do this? One of these books that's a very simple read for each of you is called The Richest Man in Babylon. It's a very thin book. You could read it tonight. And I think it would benefit us in our day and age right now. Another one is called The Millionaire Next Door. Another good little read. Not a book, but a suggestion on productivity. I am 42 years old, and it wasn't till 3 years ago that I realized that the family calendar on the refrigerator does not sync with my work calendar. And if I had only synced my family calendar, which is the most important calendar, with my work calendar, then I wouldn't have alienated so many of the most important people in my life while trying to accomplish all of these professional things. And so it has to do with productivity, but it also has to do with just utilizing all the tools that are out there to bring everybody on the same page. It did make me more productive, and it made my family more productive. Syncing calendars.
So Biodesign is a great book. I think there's a book called, I think it's The Entrepreneur's Guide to Business Law. Very good, teaching you how to deal with contracts and intellectual property and a lot of things that you'll run into. It's an easy read, and it's a good reference book to have when you're thinking about putting a business together. And then there's some other books about entrepreneurship. I think it was The Hard Thing About Hard Things, or there's Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz has a great book on just sort of what it takes to become an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, and The Founder's Dilemma, which is a book about how you come together as a new company and as co-founders and divide up equity between one another, the ownership stake in that company, and how you're thoughtful about that so that you don't have heartache, in the months and years after you start that company. And those are just a few.
Yeah, those are all great books. I actually, it sounds a little lame. I like a lot of the books that the Harvard Business School puts out. They have a whole series of books on a plethora of topics that you'll probably encounter as an entrepreneur, all the way down to having difficult conversations with employees and things like that. And they have a little bit of humor in them, and I think that just by reading them, you'll even learn a little bit about yourself and your limits and what kind of a manager you can be for a company and for the people that you represent. Those have all been pretty helpful. And I do agree with Paul. I share my calendar with my wife, and when she wants to put something on my schedule, she'll add it like a meeting, and it'll sync to my phone. So I really don't have a choice. I have to show up for those too. So definitely let your loved ones, know what you're doing at all times so they don't get anxious about what's going on, because there may be some late nights as an entrepreneur.
Thank you all very much, and thank you joining this session. And then we would like to let you know BME is here to support you, no matter you are entrepreneurs or you would like to have an idea about what an entrepreneur startup setting looks like. So our BME is preparing a new program to support you that's called Tech Launch. In this program, we have expert panels. So for example, if you would like to establish your advisory board, you could look into this resource that will be available for you. And then if your company is a little bit more matured in the startup segment, we also have lined up service providers for you. Moreover, we have industry inroads. For some of you would like to have your technology evaluated by large companies, corporations, you have the option. If you would like to exit your company to get buyout from large corporations, there is an option there for you as well. On the other hand, for students, if you are not make up your mind yet and you are thinking about to understand what's the startup environment, we will also here to support you, get you connected with our startup community so that you could have an opportunity to get an internship. So thank you so very much joining the meeting, and feel free to come over to talk with us more. Thank you.